Aquatic reptiles and semi-aquatic reptiles are maybe the most fun to watch. They're on the land, they're in the water, the behavior is so unique. But what are the best ones to keep as pets? Today, let's go over the top 5 aquatic and semi-aquatic reptiles that you can have. My name's Adam, this is Diamond, you're watching Wicked's Wicked Reptiles, stick around. Now this is an arboreal lizard, not an aquatic lizard. We'll get into that in a minute, but the only aquatic animal that I've got isn't going to be held for however long it takes to film this video. So let's just start off. Number 5, Cayman lizards. Now these guys I really wanted to put closer to number 1 because I truly think, although most reptiles that are aquatic or semi-aquatic, we'll just call them aquatic for the rest of the video, they're definitely an intermediate species, almost all of them, and some of them are more of an advanced level species. And I'd put Cayman lizards in there. Not because they're hard to feed or they're dangerous, just they need really big, really elaborate enclosures, and they need a little bit of height too, which is why I didn't put sailfin dragons, because although caimans do need some height, sailfins need even more. So I think that these guys are probably one of the most beautiful lizards you could possibly own. They need huge enclosures. These things are going to get 4 feet plus. They're going to get much larger than someone like Diamond, who can live in a 120-gallon tank. A caiman is going to need something even bigger, and almost always it needs to be custom built. And this is going to go with all of them, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. I'll say this up front. Taking care of water is not easy. Taking care of a big water receptacle is not easier. It's really difficult to take care of something that big. If you've got an animal that's 3 or 4 feet that poops in that water, you're going to have to do a water change, and it's going to be a substantial one at that. So if you have something that is several hundred gallons, for example, if you have, I don't know, 70 or 100 gallons or more of the water inside that big enclosure, it might get a little bit costly, and definitely it's going to be tedious, and then you're going to have to balance out the water quality as well. So I'll just say it up front, it kind of goes for all of these animals, but especially Cayman lizards because they're so darn big. But they are beautiful. These things are one of the most beautiful things that you could possibly look at. They look prehistoric. The way they move is absolutely amazing. And if you take water quality aside, they're not really that difficult to handle. They're not that difficult to take care of. Their diet is actually pretty darn cool. These guys in the wild are going to eat things like snails. So they do have very powerful jaws, but they're not known for being cantankerous. A lot of people can just pet their heads as they're eating and have no problem at all. They're kind of like puppy dogs, and they seem very intelligent the way that they look around. They seem like they know what's going on, and you guys know if you watch the channel, if you don't, hit subscribe, I appreciate it. You guys know I love intelligent reptiles because reptilian brain is usually a way to describe something that is dumb, and these animals are definitely not dumb. But if you're not into these little medium-sized dinosaur looking things, let's move on to number 4, yellow anacondas. Okay, give me a minute to explain. I know some of you are going to be kind of laughing or snickering because I'm saying anaconda is a good pet. You might be thinking of a green anaconda, which are big. They are the heaviest bodied snakes in the entire world, green anacondas. Their smaller cousin, yellow anacondas, are also big, but they're only going to get 10 to 14 feet, sometimes smaller. There's outliers that are bigger. But at the end of the day, if you can handle something like, I don't know, a reticulated python or a Burmese python, which again aren't for everybody, but are more common than yellow anacondas, you can definitely handle a yellow anaconda. The X factor is they need big water receptacles. And I know a lot of people are going to say, I don't keep mine with a water receptacle, and maybe that's cool. I'm not calling out saying that you're a bad keeper. I just personally think an animal that in the wild is going to spend most of their time in the water, like a yellow or a green anaconda, should probably have a recreated environment or somewhat recreated environment. Like you'd see, and I know you guys don't like when I make this comparison, but Brian Barchuk, he's got a green anaconda, maybe the coolest enclosure ever, and yellow anaconda's kind of a smaller version of that, much smaller to be realistic. But the reason I have them on the list as good pets is they're a boa species. Everybody loves boas. Boas are smart. Boas eat great. They don't have to eat as much as lizards, which is going to dominate this list. There's only one lizard actually coming up. And they can be handleable. Anacondas get a bad rap for being not handleable. But I personally know someone whose footage you're seeing probably right now that has a yellowick anaconda that is handleable. So they can be an animal that you could actually spend some time with, where a lot of aquatic animals, just like arboreal animals, a lot of the times it's hard to bond with because most of the time they're not handleable. Not always, but as a general rule. So I think anacondas are a big snake, probably for an intermediate or an expert level keeper, which is why they're so high up on the list and not close to number 1. But I also think that they're beautiful, they're interesting to look at, so even if you want something that takes the size of a wall, like a lot of people have big fish tanks that take the size of a wall, well, if you wanted something like that, but a paludarium for your snake, well, maybe a yellow anaconda is right for you, and it's definitely going to impress the crap out of your friends. Number 3, another snake, Nerodia. What the heck is a Nerodia? It's a water snake, basically. Now, Nerodia, they're all from North America. There's 9 different species. So, actually, in my region, we've got 2 in the wild. We've got, so just as an example, some of the more commonly kept ones are going to be between 2 and 4 feet. So a lot smaller than that anaconda we just talked about, which is why they're closer to the list, or the top of the list rather, number 1. But there are some drawbacks with them as well. Now, why would you want one to start? They're beautiful. They're very smart, so they have this personality about them. And although water snakes get a bad rap because they do have big teeth and they like to use them, they can tame down. And although they're not super common in captivity, you can get them captive bred now. They're becoming much more popular. I know for sure a couple people in these reptile groups I'm part of have started breeding them, and a lot of them. But the drawbacks. A lot of the times, if you see them on expo tables or in pet shops, especially pet shops, they are wild caught. And that's a bad idea. Always, wild caught stuff and farm stuff is notorious for having parasites. So you'd want to take it to a vet if that's the case. Or just be smart and get one that's bred in captivity. But also, most of the time, you can't feed them rodents. And I always say any snake that eats rodents is easier to keep than a snake that doesn't eat rodents. But I know somebody who breeds these guys, Nerodia, and they feed them smelt. So fish that you can buy at a supermarket, right, at your grocery store. So although it's going to be a little bit more difficult to find feeders for most of you, because a lot of them will need to eat fish and amphibians, they are still a great snake. And yeah, they're going to musk on you if they're not used to you, and they might bite you. But once they tame out, they're a great size, and they're smart, like I said, and they're curious, and they're a lot of fun. And they don't need a huge enclosure. They need a big enclosure, but not as big as the last 2 that we talked about. So if you want a snake that's not huge, that is a water-dwelling snake, Nerodia might be the one for you. Oh yeah, and they give live birth, which is awesome. Everybody likes a snake that gives live birth. And they're pretty big litters, or broods, depending on what you want to call them. But let's move on to number 2, water dragons. Which one? Well, Australians and Chinese water dragons. I mean, it's much easier to find Chinese water dragons. They're like $40 at every PetSmart that you could possibly find. I always recommend buying one from a breeder. Support local, of course. But I mean, no matter which way you slice it, they're kind of similar. They don't look similar, but they get to similar sizes. I think Australians are a little bit cooler looking because they're more rare. But then if you want something that looks iguana-esque, or looks kind of like a basilisk, which could fit on the list, but they're not on there, sorry, then you want something like that because it's green and I don't know. Either way, they need a big enclosure, something that is much larger than, say, a bearded dragon would need. And they do need a considerable size water area as well. I know there's a bunch of really cool videos out there. Serpa Design did this awesome video about making this bioactive, very beautiful looking enclosure for a Chinese water dragon. It looked beautiful, and you could do this too. You would need a big enclosure, probably, maybe custom made. There are some, like if you wanted to get a 300 gallon, 150, maybe, I don't know, some people would say that's too small, but you can get tanks out there that you could make it work with. What are you doing? It just depends what size you want to go with. But you can have beautiful, naturalistic looking paludariums that you can make for these guys. So they're always going to be impressive. And because they do get 2 to 3 feet-ish, something like that, they're an impressive size lizard. But it's not going to be something that you could walk right by and not notice. These things are pretty noticeable, and of course they do like a little bit of height as well, but not as much as the Cayman Lizard, and they don't get as big. So if you want something that is maybe a little bit less handleable, but looks super awesome, and needs a little bit smaller enclosure, you're probably better off with a water dragon in that case. And to round it out, number 1, turtles. Obviously. Now, don't get me wrong, turtles are not beginner level pets. I know a lot of people, especially back in the 80s and 90s, would get these cute little red ear sliders. They'd find them on a trail or find them in a pet store where someone else probably found them on a trail, and they brought them home and they outgrew their enclosures really quick because they do need a fair amount of space, and there are different species of turtles, right? Of course. So if you get something smaller, right? I've got this Mississippi map turtle that's only about 4.5 inches, something like that, 5 inches, Mappy, and then I've also got Buggy, who's about 7 inches, and this is a yellow belly slider, very similar to red ear sliders. So it depends what size tank for what size turtle. I guess I should say what size turtle requires what size tank. And as a general rule, it changes, of course, but for every inch of turtle, you want 10 gallons of water. So these guys, their tank is a little bit too small. That's what I got them in. They spent 20 years together in this tank, but they are getting an upgrade. You guys know that we're moving, we're getting a bigger reptile room. This is happening literally in less than a month. So there will be an upgrade for these guys. But when it comes to care and availability and cost and everything about turtles, they're the king or queens of reptiles that are aquatic because they spend most of their time in the water. And although they do need a spot to get fully out of the water so that they can bask with UVB light and a heat lamp, but just in my experience looking at these guys, they've got this big turtle dock that both of them can fit on, and neither one is basically ever on there. They're almost always in the water. And their diets are easy, right? You feed them a whole bunch of there's a whole bunch of options, but as a staple, you can feed them pellets with other things as well. And they don't get super big, and they're not dangerous, which is the other thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, Buggy and Mappy have both tried to take bites out of me, but they're slow. They're turtles. Just keep your hands away from their face, and they're fine. They're easy to pick up. They've got shells, and their claws aren't going to really mangle you most of the time. Of course, if you're looking at your snapping turtle and thinking this guy's a joke, well, I'm not really talking about snapping turtles. Those guys can be dangerous. But in general, turtles are probably your best option. They're the one that you thought of. You knew they were coming. So there you go. What do you think about the top 5 aquatic reptiles that you could have? Is there something that should have been on the list, something that should not have been on the list? Leave it in the comment section below. I mean, I did this video because you guys. I asked you guys what you want to see. You picked this one. So if you have an idea for a video of your own, throw it in the comment section. I'd be happy to take your advice and do that video. And a special thank you, as always, to the Patreon supporters. These guys, I can't say thank you enough. You get to see videos early, a little bit of extra content, behind the scenes stuff. You know about that special clutch of eggs that's about to hatch that no one else knows about. So for as little as $1 a month, you can be a Patreon member too. And I've officially plugged absolutely everything. Hit subscribe. See you on Thursday.